By the end of this video, we're going to add some NPCs to our game, where when you walk up to them and press your interact button, they'll talk to you. We'll be using scriptable objects to add in the dialogue lines and different options like speed and sound of the voice. You'll be able to auto-progress your lines or not, very customizable. So cool, let's check it out. So first let's get our NPC's GameObject set up. So let's right click in the hierarchy and go 2D object, sprites, square, and I'll call this NPC. If I open up the sprite renderer here, I'm going to add the sorting layer to be on the same layer as player, so that when we move our NPC around, it can stand in front of these collision objects and go behind our walk behind layers. On our NPC, we're going to want to add a component, and I'm going to add a box collider 2D so that our player can collide with this and not walk through our NPC, but also be able to check if it's an interactable object, which it will be once we add the script. So cool, let's add some sprites in for our NPC, so we're not just looking at a white box. I'm actually going to right click in our assets and create a new folder, which I'm going to call NPC, and I'm going to organize our NPCs out into their own folders here. So I'll create another one, and the first NPC I'm going to make is an old man. So cool, in our Ninja Adventure asset pack, I'm going to go inside actor, and in here, I'm going to select old man number 3. You can see we get this face set PNG of a little portrait of the old man as well. I'm going to drag that into our folder so we can use that on our dialog box. Then I'm going to go into separate animations and I'm going to drag in his idle animation, since that's all we'll need for now. So cool, let's get the details for these set up. For this face set, the pixels per unit should match what the size of the image is. So if I show you, we can go back to this face set in the folder, right click and go properties. And if you go to details, you can see it's 38 by 38. So we can set our pixels per unit to be 38, set filter mode to be point no filter and compression to be none. These are all 16 by 16, so pixels per unit is going to be 16. Filter mode, point no filter, compression to be none. And then up the top, we want sprite mode to be multiple, as we have multiple sprites within this image. If we click apply, then go to the sprite editor, grid by cell size, 16 by 16, click slice, and then click apply. Now we can open this up and we've got all our separate little sprites. So now I can click on my NPC, drag my old man sprite into our sprite renderer, and there he is. Lovely. Cool, now there's one more thing I'm going to want to create within each NPC folder. First of all, I'm going to go back to my assets, right click and go create C# script and call this NPC Dialogue. Let's double click on this to open it up. And what we're going to create here, instead of this being a mono behavior, is going to be our first scriptable object. A scriptable object is basically a class that you can create as a new object, which will hold different types of data for you. At the top, so we can create this in our assets when we right click, we can go create asset menu, brackets, file name equals, so when you create a new file, what pops up? I'm just going to type new NPC dialogue, then comma menu name. So I'm just going to call this NPC dialogue. Cool, we're not going to want this start or update, and instead we're going to want everything we're going to need for our NPC's dialogue system. So let's add in a public string for our NPC name, public sprite for the NPC portrait, public string array for our dialogue lines, public float for the typing speed, so how fast does our character speak. I'm going to set this to a default of 0.0f, a public audio clip for our voice sound, that's a weird name for it, and a public float for our voice pitch. I'm going to set this to a default of 1f, which is the normal pitch of an audio clip. Now there's two bonus ones I want to add in at the bottom, since I wanted to cover everything I could think of to do with NPCs and dialogue. And these are a public bool array for auto progress lines, which is going to match our dialogue lines. So will the next line auto progress and start without you having to press the interact button to skip to the next line? And then a public float for auto progress delay, which I'll set to a default of 1.5f. So after 1.5 seconds, if our line had finished typing, he'll start speaking the next line. You'll see some examples of this once we get the functionality in. But for now, that's all we need. We can go back to Unity, and back in our NPC folder inside Old Man, I'm going to right click and go create, and you can see at the top here we've got NPC Dialogue. So I'll select this, call this Old Man Dialogue, and now you can see in our inspector we've got all these slots for our data. So name, Old Man, bright is our portrait, so that's the face set we passed in. Our dialogue lines, as they're an array, you can add as many as you want. You could go on talking forever, you just keep pressing this plus. I'll do 2 just for now, and you can type in here whatever you want. I'm now going to skip down to this auto progress lines. In fact, I don't like this being separate from the dialogue lines, so I'm going to go back to our script, cut these out and stick them underneath the dialogue lines, just so our two arrays are right next to each other. There, that's updated back in Unity. So now if I add two elements on here, these would then sync up with these lines. So let's say I want the first line to auto progress. So he'll say, "Hello there, young man." And then the second line, which is his final line, I'll make it so the player has to interact to close this dialog box, so it doesn't close on its own. Cool, I'll leave the rest of these as they are, but for voice sound, we're going to need an audio clip. So I've taken a look through the Ninja Venture asset pack inside sounds. Inside game, there is 4 different options for voices, but I didn't really like the sound of any of them. But you can check them out, of course, and decide what you want for yours. Instead, I went inside menu and I used menu number 4. I'm not going to keep this sound inside our OldMan folder because we might want to use it for other NPCs. So I'm just going to move it into sounds and then drag it from sounds into our voice sound slot. Cool, so now we've got all our data set up for our old man to get talking. Now we need to make him talk by writing the NPC script. So let's click on our NPC GameObject in our hierarchy, click Add Component, New Script, and I'll call this NPC. Let's double click on this to open it up, and we're not going to need this start and update, but we are going to want some references to our UI for our dialog box, and of course a public NPC dialogue for our dialogue data, which will be the data we just created. For the UI, we'll want a public GameObject for our dialog panel, a public TMP_text, hover over and add using TMP Pro, which is Text Mesh Pro, for our dialog text. And if you do comma, because we're also going to want our name text to pass in the name of our NPC. And finally, we'll also want our public image, hover over and using UnityEngine.ui for our portrait image. Cool, so that's all our public variables. We're also going to want a private int for our dialogue index, just to know what line of our dialogue we're on. And we'll want a private bool for is typing, and then comma, we want to know is our dialogue active. Cool, so that's all our variables. Now hopefully you followed our previous tutorial and added in interactables in an interaction system to your game. If not, of course you can do this however you like, or you can go back and follow that tutorial, as I'm about to set up how we interact with our NPC by after mono behavior going interactable. And of course this is red because if you hover over, we're not implementing our interact and can interact. So if we go over and go implement interface, we can set up can interact here to say return exclamation mark to say not is dialogue active. So if our dialog box isn't active, we can interact with our NPC. Cool, now inside interact, we'll say if our dialogue data equals null, so say we have no dialogue data, or brackets, if our pause controller, we added a pause system in our game, so if our game is paused and not is dialogue active, so if our game is paused and our dialogue is not active, then I'm going to want to return, say our menu's open and you're trying to talk to an NPC. We don't want the dialog box to pop up over the top of our menu. Cool, so next we want to check if our dialogue is active, and we press that interact button. We'll want to go next line in our text, else if the dialogue isn't currently active and we press that interact button next to an NPC, we're going to start the dialogue. Cool, so let's first write the start dialogue by going void start dialogue, and in here we'll go is dialogue active equals true. Dialogue index will set to be 0. Our name text, we can go dot set text, and in the brackets pass in our dialogue data dot name, so this will be old man like we typed into our scriptable object. Then we'll set up our portrait image dot sprite to equal our dialogue data dot NPC portrait. We'll set our dialogue panel to set active true, and we'll call our pause controller set pause to be true. So we pause our game. This will make it so our player can't walk around and leave our NPC behind as they're talking. That'll be very rude. And then of course I want to start typing out the text from our dialogue lines. So I'm going to add a comment where I'm going to type the line of our dialogue, and now we can write the function for that. So as this is typing out over time, we're actually going to use a coroutine. So for a coroutine, we're going to want an enumerator, which I'll call type line. And here we'll set is typing to be true. We'll set our dialogue text dot set text to be empty, just so we clean that out. And then for the typing effect, we're going to go for each char letter in dialogue data dot dialogue lines and pass in our dialogue index. We set this to be 0 at the top as we started talking, so this will be the first line. Then inside this for each we'll go dialogue text dot text plus equals letter. So we're going to go around every single letter in our dialogue lines. This will include any punctuation like spaces or full stops. And as it goes around, it'll add this letter to the text. Of course, if we left it like this, for each would run so fast that it'll just type out the whole line. So we're going to go yield, return new, wait for seconds, and pass in DialogueData.typing speed, so that after every letter it takes a pause, which is going to be quite short. Our default is 0.05, then types out the next letter. Once this for each is finished, we're going to go is typing equals false, so we know that the line is complete. And then if you remember, I added in that auto progression. So this is where the auto progression goes, where we say if DialogueData.AutoProgressLines.length is greater than the dialogue index, so we're not going to try and grab a value that doesn't exist, and our DialogueData.AutoProgressLines square brackets dialogue index. So have we ticked this index to say we want it to auto progress? If we have, we're going to yield return new wait for seconds, and we'll pass in our DialogueData.AutoProgress delay. So we're going to wait however long we've passed in. I think by default it's 1.5, so it's going to wait 1.5 seconds before it auto progresses, and then it'll display the next line, which is the function we're also going to want up in our interact. So cool, we'll get a double whammy there. But in start dialog, we can now call this type line by going start coroutine, passing in type line, brackets, semicolon. So cool, that's our start dialog done. Let's call this up in our interact, start dialog, brackets. Next we can do our next line function. So I'm going to go below start dialog, and I'll call this void next line, and we'll say if is typing, and we've called to get the next line. We're going to stop all coroutines, so we want to stop this from skipping around this for each and auto progressing, anything like that. I'm going to go dialog text.setText to be DialogueData.DialogueLines and pass in the dialogue index. So instead of typing letter by letter, this is going to autocomplete that full line into our text box, and we'll set is typing to equal false, else if our dialogue index plus 1 is still less than our DialogueData.DialogueLines.length, and a better way of doing this dialogue index plus 1 would be going plus plus dialogue index. So if we add 1 to the index, do we have another dialogue line to go to? If yes, we'll start our coroutine, which will start typing out the next line in our dialogue data line. Cool, and then finally, if there are no more lines, or we're not currently typing to autocomplete, and we're either set to auto progress, we're calling this next line, but there's no lines to go to, we want to end the dialogue, which is another function we'll write. But that's all we'll need for next line. So we can take this, stick it up in our interact, next line, and also down in our type line. So if we want to auto progress, this will automatically call next line for us. Cool. Now, like I said, we want a final function to end the dialogue. So at the bottom, we're actually going to make this a public void end dialogue, and we're making this public so I can attach this also to a button in our game, which will be a little close button, so you can click with your mouse on the UI, just so you have lots more options for your game. In here, we're going to want to stop all our coroutines, so stop typing. We'll set is dialogue active to be false. We'll set our dialogue text to be an empty string, our dialogue panel dot set active to be false, and our pause controller dot set pause to be false, so our game is no longer paused. Cool, very easy. That's all we need to end the dialogue. Let's copy this, scroll back up to next line, and paste it in this else. So when we run out of dialogue to show, we'll end the dialogue. And that's our complete script. Very cool. So let's go back to Unity, and if we click on our NPC, we can see we have a slot for our dialogue data. So let's go to our OldMan, and we've got this scriptable object here with all the data on it. You can drag this scriptable object into your dialogue data slot. So that's all good and set up. Next, we're going to need all the UI for our dialog box to pop up at the bottom. So I've got my UI object in my hierarchy. I'm going to open this up and right click on UI, call this the dialog panel, which will hold all our other objects. I'm going to open up that rect transform. I'm going to click on this box on the side that says stretch and anchor this to the bottom middle. So that's this one at the bottom here. Then I'm going to set the Y position to be 200, the width to be 800, and the height to be 200. I'm also going to set the background of our image to be black, and the transparency, so this alpha, the A, to be something like 175, maybe even 200. Let's make it darker. Cool, so that's our panel. Let's now right click and go UI image, and I'll call this our dialogue portrait. I'm going to position this to be -310, so it's just off to the side here. the width to be 128 and the height to be 128. Cool, this sprite is going to be set as we pass in different ones for different NPCs, so we don't have to worry about changing the sprite. In the dialog panel, I'm going to right click, go UI. Next, I'll do the NPC name text. Obviously you can position these wherever you want, but for me I'm going to go minus 125. Keep the width and height the same. I'll just change this to be NPC name. Change the font size down to be about 20. Oh, and sorry, back up the top. The position for the Y I'm going to set to 40. So it's just at the top in line with our image. Next we'll right click on the panel, go UI, text again, and I'll go dialogue text. This is the main text for all our dialogue lines. I'm going to position this on the X 75 and on the Y minus 25. And for the width, we want this to be wider, so I'm going to set it to 600 by 100 on the height. If you double click on your UI, you can see this in the scene view. So you can see how this fits nicely inside our dialog box. Add some default text. And for the font size, I'm going to set this to be 24. So cool. And finally, what I'm going to add is a UI button, which I'm going to call close button. So we can click to end our dialogue. For the X, I'm going to set this to be 350 and the Y to be 60. The width and height, I'm going to set to be 40 by 40. And if you open up this close button, I'm going to change this text from button to just be an X. I'm going to set the font to be bold, and I'm going to set the font size to be something bigger, like 36. So cool, we've got a cool little close button there. To set up this close button, it's very easy. If you select close button in the hierarchy, scroll on down, we've got this on click. If you press the plus, drag in your NPC, and then that no function drop down, if you click on here, hover over NPC, we can call end dialogue, which will close down our dialog box for us. So cool, that's all our UI set up. Let's click on our NPC for dialog panel. Let's drag in dialog panel, dialog text, name text, dialog portrait, portrait image. Very cool. Of course, we don't want this dialog panel to be open when we start our game. So if you click on dialog panel and just untick it in the inspector, this will be deactivated by default, same as our menu. And now with that all set up, we can finally do a test. So here's our froggy with his little footsteps going. Let's walk up to our NPC. You can see we get this interaction icon appear above our head, so we know it's an interactable. His dialogue appears and types out on its own. Oh, and I didn't press a button, it'll auto-progress, great. Now when he's finished typing, it shouldn't auto-progress on this last one as we didn't tick that final line. Very cool. You can see here I've messed up. It says OldMan Dialogue. I think I set this to be the wrong text. So back in our script, when we start our dialogue, we do name text, set text to DialogueData name. That is the name of our dialogue data, not our NPC name. Silly me, I was going too fast. We can test this again now. As we walk up to our NPC, let me auto-complete that line. Yeah, I haven't got time for you. Haha, it works. We also see his name is OldMan. If I press the close button, it closes on down. Very cool. We can talk to him again, and there it goes. Great. Now, you may remember we added in that sound for him to be able to make a sound as he talks. We haven't got that activated yet, so let's go look at our sound effect manager. Inside our game controller object, we have a sound effect manager. You can complete the previous video, so you have this inside your game as well. But we're also going to add to this to add on our NPC's voice. We currently have two audio sources on our sound effect manager, one for randomized pitches and one for playing normal pitch one-shot sound effects. To be safe, in case we have other sound effects playing in the background, I'm going to add another audio source, which is going to be just for our NPC's voices. So to set that up in our sound effect manager, you can see we've got our audio source and then our random pitch audio source. Let's duplicate this line by pressing Ctrl D, and I'll call this our voice audio source. Next, anywhere we've got this random pitch audio source, we can duplicate this line, replace it with voice audio source, and then for audio sources, we'll want to do audio source 2. So we select the third one in that list. Cool, let's scroll down. Now we've got a play function that calls from our sound effect library, but we've got our sound clip inside our scriptable object. So we're going to write a new function specifically for playing our voices. Let's make sure we add down the bottom our voice audio source dot volume to equal volume in our set volume function so that we can edit the volume of voices too. And then underneath play, don't worry, this is very short. We're going to add a new public static void play voice, where we're going to pass in an audio clip from our scriptable object, which I'll call audio clip, and also a float pitch, which I'll set to equal a default of 1f. We also had a voice pitch inside our dataset, so you can edit NPCs' voices all within that scriptable object. So to do this, we're just going to go voice audio source dot pitch equals pitch, and then voice audio source dot play one shot, and pass in our audio clip. Cool, so that's all we need to be able to get our voice playing. Very easy. Now let's find somewhere we can call this inside our NPC script. Cool, so we want this to mimic our NPC talking. So if we scroll on down to type line, of course we type out each individual letter. So as we type out each letter, we can play our audio clip. So it'll be like, you know. So after each letter is added, we'll go sound effect manager dot play voice and pass in DialogueData dot voice sound and then DialogueData dot voice pitch. And guess what? That's all you need. So cool, let's go back to Unity and press play to test this out. Let's walk up to our NPC. Oh, it's quite loud. Cool, he's yapping right at me. So cool, let's test this out again. I'm going to press the interact button this time to cut him off and skip the typing out and see how that sounds. Cool, sounds great. Of course, in our settings, we can use our slider for our sound effects and make them quieter. That's better. He ain't shouting at me anymore. So as an example, I'm going to create one more NPC by selecting up NPC in the hierarchy and holding down Ctrl D to duplicate it. And I'll rename this to be NPC underscore girl, because I'm going to add a girl to our game. So I'm going to create a new folder, of course, call it girl, grab her icon and her idle animations, set these up, and I'll start speeding this up now so you don't have to watch everything slowly. But I'm basically doing everything we just did so you don't have to see it again. Cool, so I'm creating the new scriptable object for her. I'm going to set all of these to auto progress because she's going to be in a rush, and the auto progress delay to be something short, as well as the typing speed. We'll make it all very speedy. I'm bringing in menu 2 for her voice. Also now all I have to do is drag my girl dialogue into this data set, press play, and when I walk up to her, she's very fast at talking, everything auto progresses, and that was very easy to do. As you can see, she's very much in a rush and she's like, oh, I gotta go, but she's just standing still. Well, in our next video, I'm gonna get our NPC walking around. Our NPCs will be able to walk between waypoints or wherever you want. I don't know, they could walk all over the place. Be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss that. Otherwise, as always, be sure to check out our Patreon where you can grab every single piece of code I've ever written on this channel. For only $7 a month, it's a steal. Or you can grab this whole project, the whole game template, where you'll get all our finished features and also access to all our future updates for free. But if not, thank you very much for watching. Like and subscribe. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye!